His most recent book is The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, published by Random House, and he joins us from station KUOW in Seattle. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you for that generous introduction.
Oh, well, it's the generous. It's the facts, man, just the facts. Were you shaking last night in Seattle?
Yeah, it was very interesting. You know, your first impulse is to think that it's internal, that you're dizzy or you're sick or something, and then you find everybody else is having the same symptoms, and you figure maybe it's something outside of your head and not inside of it.
Well, you are recovering, are you not?
I as far as I can tell, I'm all better.
Oh, good.
I've been very lucky.
Okay, that's good because it's good. It's good to see that whatever was ailing you, is not attacking you anymore. So that's pretty good.
Right, it's gone away.
Let's talk a little bit about a book. When an author decides to write a book, they usually feel very strongly about something. And that I think that of all the books that you've written, this latest, The Demon-Haunted World, really shows that you're angry about something here, about pseudoscience and the lack of rational thought. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, I'm certainly concerned. I don't know if angry is right, although maybe it is. Maybe I am a little angry that we have such great tools, such powerful mental apparatus at our command, which we tend to ignore. I mean, science, more than a body of knowledge, is a way of thinking, and its enormous success is due to accepting contentions only on the basis of evidence, and compelling evidence at that. It doesn't matter if it feels good. What matters is if it's true. And naturally, there are people who want what feels good. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And if discovering that we're not at the center of the universe, if we're not at the apple of God's eye, if we are, and so on, though, if there is no afterlife or no evidence for an afterlife, those contentions rub a lot of people the wrong way, and they'd rather not hear from science on such issues. They'd rather have their own fantasies which make them feel good.
But are we going through an unusual period? I was tuning through the dials last night on television, and there are shows. There are shows called Sightings and other shows like it that are just popping up all over the place, dealing with psychic phenomena, alien abduction, all the kinds of things that you talk about in your book. Are we going through an unusual period in history where there's a tremendous popularity in this that there has never been before?
No, I don't think so. I think this way of looking at things, embracing pseudoscience and superstition and fundamentalist zealotry, has been with us humans for all of our history. It's not surprising that we should find that it's still around. But what is a little surprising is that science, which is so successful, which is responsible for our lives in most cases, is so poorly taught, is so poorly understood, and that the kind of skepticism that we would use in purchasing a used car is in many cases not in evidence on ESP and crop circles and literal interpretation of what's written in the Bible and so on.
Yet you point out in the book that you had a terrible science education, and look what happened to you. You went on to become interested in science. Could that not happen to other people?
I'm sure it could, but I mean, growing up in the 30s and 40s, I didn't have a good science education, although I had lots of science courses in middle school and high school. But it wasn't until I got to college that I had real science by people who actually understood it, understood how to teach it, and that was such a breath of fresh air. Today we spend a lot of money and a lot of time on science education in the schools, but very often it is inadequately taught. Why is the basketball coach teaching chemistry? Why is the science all from the book and so little from the laboratory? Why are teachers nervous when bright kids ask penetrating questions? Why do the varsity basketball, baseball, and football players get spiffy jackets that are attractive to the opposite sex, but expert mathematicians and scientists and historians and others not get spiffy jackets? Who made those decisions? Why are we doing things that way? And that's a kind of hint of the nature of the problem. It runs up and down our society. Almost every newspaper in the country has a daily astrology column. Most don't even have a weekly science column. When's the last time you saw science discussed on those dreary Sunday morning insider political programs? When's the last time a president of the United States made an intelligent remark on science, and so on?
Well, I think that's a good point, because I think that my own personal feeling about this is that people do want to talk about science. And they are very interested in the unknown. They are interested in where we came from, where we're going. And so the only place they get to see anything like that is in these new breeds of programs that they're on the air.
Absolutely.
And so now at least here's an opportunity to let their mind expand and watch them and think about something, even if it's pseudoscience.
You see, my experience is that all children have an intact sense of wonder. That is, when I teach kindergarten or first grade, I have a room full of scientists, at least as far as wonder is concerned. They're not up on the skepticism quotient yet, but that's fine. That's something that can be taught to them. But by the time they get to high school, when I talk to seniors, 12th graders in high school, it's all gone. There are no follow-up questions. They're not listening to what their colleagues are saying. They're worried about how their questions will be received by their peers. Their minds have been turned off. The sense of wonder is almost gone. Something dreadful happens to students between first and 12th grades, and it's not just puberty. The interest in science, which is there in first grade, is somehow beaten out of them by 12th grade. And I think part of it is that there are adults who are nervous about being asked penetrating questions by young people, and so they give off-putting answers. Why is the moon round? Well, what did you expect it to be? Square? Instead of encouraging the child, it's a deep question, why is the moon round? It can get to the nature of gravitation, of central forces, the strength of materials. There's so much in there if you wanted to pursue it. And likewise, all those other wonderful questions that kids ask. Why do we have toes? What's the birthday of the world? How deep could you dig a hole? And so on. Every one of those is an aperture to exciting children, their natural aptitude and interest in science, exciting that, and encouraging them not necessarily to be professional scientists, but to be citizens who have a responsible role in dealing with science. We have a society based on science and technology, and at the same time have arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. That's a prescription for disaster as clear as anything.
And they then look towards scientists or people of scientists to explain to them how things work or what's wrong with society. And yet at the same time, a lot of people, because scientists work for the quote unquote the government or paid for by big universities, they're also distrustful of what they hear that scientists have to say, thinking that this is just another government cover-up. A lot of the politics of the age we're living in has also filtered into the world of science, and this has been going on for years.
Well, I think it should be said, Ira, that scientists, because science and technology are so powerful, scientists have provided instruments of destruction. I mean, it really is true that scientists are, in some sense, responsible for nuclear weapons, which could destroy the global civilization, maybe the species. Scientists have played a key role in the means by which the ozone layer is destroyed and by which global warming is happening. And so it is natural, especially if scientists are not in the media explaining what they're about, for people to mistrust scientists. And you see it in the Saturday morning cartoon Mad Scientist caricature, which is very prevalent.
I also find, though, that sometimes scientists, and I don't mean this about you, but a lot of times scientists speak down to people. And they are condescending. Even, I mean, as a journalist, I've had it happen to me many times, but that's part of my business. But I also think that when people ask a question, or especially about something that they don't understand, it's something that is in the realm of the paranormal, or they are truly questioning it, that scientists will say, that's not an area we are going to spend any money to investigate. You know, why do you ask such a silly question? We're not going to look into it and just go away. Much the way that probably their teachers talk to them. When in effect that people are looking for scientists to answer these questions about any of these topics that you mentioned in your book. I mean, I think this is sort of a failing of scientists to answer those questions.
I agree with you again, Ira. The general attitude of many scientists is that that such questions are interesting and important, but that the work that's been done shows that it's very unlikely there's anything to it. But that's very different from saying that asking about ESP is a question beneath contempt. No scientist should do that. You don't dismiss questions before you look into them, but only after you look into them. It's sort of the difference between prejudice and what I might call post-judice. Post-judice is perfectly okay, but prejudice is not. There has always been a fraction of the scientific community that not only dismisses such questions, but dismisses the whole idea of explaining what they're about to the public. In the 6th century BC, the Pythagoreans discovered that the square root of 2 was an irrational number. That is, could not be represented as the ratio of any two numbers, no matter how big. This information about the irrationality of the square root of 2 was promptly classified top secret. And there was a Pythagorean who made the mistake of explaining it to the public. And when his ship went down and he drowned, Pythagoreans all over the Aegean nodded their heads, saying, you see, the gods have stepped in to prevent the popularization of science. No, I think scientists have an obligation, if nothing else for selfish reasons, to explain what they're doing, to explain the joy and power of science. We live in a democracy. The people are supposed to have something to say about what the government does. Every day there are scientific issues being legislated on. And how can we instruct our elected representatives if we don't understand what the issues are? I mean, AIDS and cancer and superconducting super colliders and decaying infrastructure, and should we send people to Mars, and all of those questions, genetic engineering and many medical issues, all those questions involve science. We must understand those issues just for our own well-being. Then there are economic questions. There are industries that are fleeing American shores because American workers at the entry level are insufficiently educated in 8th grade arithmetic or whatever it is to produce quality products. Then there's the fact that science in our time has been able to approach the deepest questions of origins, something that every human culture has been interested in and spent some resources on. Where do we come from? Where does life come from? Where does our planet come from? Where does the whole universe come from? We actually have some preliminary answers to those questions, and you have to be made out of wood not to be interested a little bit in that. People are so grateful to learn some of the tentative answers to these questions. And then finally, that skeptical, questioning, don't accept what authority tells you attitude of science is also nearly identical to the attitude of mind necessary for a functioning democracy. And science and democracy have very consonant values and approaches, and I don't think you can have the one without the other.
1-800-989 8255. Let's go to Mike in Juneau, Wisconsin. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Ira. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, to finally get to talk to you, Mr. Sagan. I met you briefly at the Space Science Building in Ithaca some years back, and I got to say I couldn't agree with you more about there not being enough of this exposure in the media for people like myself and a few others. And in addition, I don't think it goes far enough. But what I wanted to ask you years ago when I met you, and I'd like to ask you now, a very personal question. What is your real belief in the spiritual beginnings of all of this? In other words, I've read many places that many scientists such as yourself are either agnostic or atheistic in their beliefs about the initial beginnings of the universe. And secondly, my brother-in-law is a highly classified person that works for the Air Force. The question revolves around what your belief is in UFOs. He's told me some things that I can't repeat about the Roswell incident. Perhaps you could give us your thoughts on that.
Let's start with the last one first.
Sure.
Okay, Dr. Sagan.
Okay, but I don't want to duck the first one.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Well, in 1947, in near Roswell, New Mexico, stuff came down on a ranch, and the stuff was then picked up by Air Force personnel. People apparently were told to keep quiet about it, and over the years, the story has emerged that these were parts of a crashed alien spacecraft, and that little alien bodies were shipped to an Air Force base in Ohio, and that they're still languishing in freezers with their perfect teeth. The actual fact seems to be that, as the Air Force announced very belatedly just a couple of years ago, that this was a balloon at tropopause altitudes, that is just where the stratosphere begins, with acoustic instruments designed to detect Soviet nuclear weapons explosions from halfway around the world. There is an acoustic channel at the tropopause by which you might be able to hear such explosions. And this was a matter of the highest concern for the security of the United States and was properly classified. Newspaper photographs at the time show flimsy polyethylene-like material and balsa wood, hardly consistent with the spacecraft of an alien advanced civilization, but perfectly consistent with balloons. I think that there are two museums of UFOs in Roswell, New Mexico. You can make money, you can get your name in the paper, you can have a break from the humdrum day by inventing stories about Roswell, New Mexico. I don't know what your brother has told you, but I would treat it with a real grain of salt.
Does that mean you don't believe in UFOs?
Well, what do we mean by believe, which in fact takes us to the first question. What do we mean by believe? If the evidence is compelling, then we believe. If the evidence is not compelling, we don't believe. We withhold judgment. And UFOs merely is an abbreviation for unidentified flying objects. If we see something in the sky, we don't know what it is. To my mind, that's it. We don't know what it is. It does not automatically follow that it's spacecraft from somewhere else. The vast majority of UFO reports have quite prosaic explanations. It's partly people seeing natural phenomena in the sky with which they're unfamiliar, including cases of astronomers doing that. Sometimes conscious hoaxes. Sometimes people with who hallucinate, and 25% of all people hallucinate. So there are many other explanations, and only if you've been able to eliminate all of those explanations would you give serious consideration to the possibility that we're being visited. Nobody's more interested than me in the possibility of the existence of extraterrestrial life. I've been involved in sending spacecraft to other planets to look for it. I've been involved in in using large radio telescopes to listen for signals from civilizations on planets of other stars would save me so much effort if the aliens were here. Even if they are short, dour, and sexually obsessed, as the alien abductees, so-called, claim.
And before we lose time this half hour, part one of his question about your personal beliefs.
Okay, well, I treat the existence of God and the perhaps creation of the universe in exactly the same way. What is the evidence? Now, the word God is used to cover a wide variety of very different ideas, ranging maybe from the idea of an outsized, light-skinned male with a long white beard who sits in a throne in the sky and tallies the fall of every sparrow, for which there is no evidence, none at all, to the view of Einstein and Spinoza, which is essentially that God is the sum total of the laws of nature. And since there are laws of nature, and since remarkably the same laws hold throughout this magnificent and vast universe, if that's what you mean by God, then of course there's a God. So everything depends on the definition of God. One last point, you ask about the origin of the universe, but that's assuming the issue in question, namely that there was an origin of the universe. And in some cosmological models, the universe is infinitely old, therefore uncreated, therefore there's nothing for a creator to do. So I think these are very deep and difficult issues in which both theologians and scientists ought to bear in mind their own limitations before the difficulties of these issues.
We're going to take a short break and come back and continue our conversation with Carl Sagan in about 90 seconds. This is Talk of the Nation Science Friday from National Public Radio.
Support for this program is provided by this and other National Public Radio member stations and NPR. Special funding for Talk of the Nation Science Friday comes from the National Science Foundation. This program is a production of National Public Radio in association with member station WNYC New York. The views expressed are not necessarily those of NPR, the underwriters, or this broadcast station. Celebrating 25 years of radio excellence, this is NPR, National Public Radio.
Welcome back to Talk of the Nation Science Friday. I'm Ira Flatow. We're talking this hour with my guest, Dr. Carl Sagan, and he's author of the new book, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. I recommend it. I think it is. I think it's a terrific book, and it answers a lot of questions you may have, or questions you've been thinking about all these. Pseudoscience, parapsychology, every kind of everything from crop circles to alien abduction in the book, and it's an excellent book. Let me just remind you that on Monday's program in this hour, tune in for a discussion of the growing parental rights movement. And let me reintroduce my guest, Carl Sagan, is professor of astronomy and space sciences at Cornell University in Ithaca. And the book, again, is The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. Carl, reading the book, a person could come away saying, well, I guess that Carl Sagan believes that scientists are the only ones with the right answers. That there is only one answer, it's science, and only scientists then know what the right answers are. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, it depends what you mean by science. If by science you mean that you bear in mind human fallibility and you treat claims to knowledge skeptically, then I would agree science is the only way to go. But that's a very broad definition. Everybody, as I was saying before, who buys a used car would then be a scientist. Science is only a Latin word that means knowledge, and we shouldn't imagine that it's something very erudite and arcane. I just think the key point of science is criticism, debate, open inquiry, the willingness to systematize knowledge, to withhold belief until the evidence is compelling, and to listen seriously to criticism.
Well, I find that as a criticism of many scientists, that they are, they because they are people and have human foibles, that they are closed-minded and will not listen to new ideas and very much are just the kinds of people you say not to be. I'm sure you find some of those people also.
I do indeed. Scientists are human beings. We all knew that, and they have the foibles of human beings. But it is the mutual process of science, all the scientists working together, which makes it work so well. That is, yes, scientist A may propose his theory and be irredeemably attached to it. And scientist B may criticize the theory because B is jealous of A, or B is ambitious, or whatever you want to imagine. But A and B together get a debate going that other scientists then enter, and this is the aperture to understanding, finding out what is really true. I mean, science is an enterprise that gives its highest rewards to those who disprove the views of its most revered figures. Religion is exactly the opposite. Religion doesn't want any criticism of its most revered figures. Science makes progress. After all, I mean, the person who disproved the ultimate validity of the views on mechanics and gravitation of Isaac Newton is Albert Einstein. Newton, a tremendously revered figure, and Einstein revered in part because he proved Newton wrong, or wrong beyond a certain range of parameters. And that's what I mean. It's the collective enterprise of science which has the virtues I described. The individual scientists are, of course, flawed, as we all are. And
scientists can be very cruel to one another when they disagree. I'm speaking specifically, for example, like the last 7 years of cold fusion, where scientists have cut off or blacklisted just about any scientist who's secretly working in his basement because he believes there's something going on. Maybe fusion is the wrong word for it, but there's something going on in those little jars, and that they continue to work in secret or go to Europe or get patents in Europe that they can't get in this country, and been basically cut off from any sort of discourse with their colleagues.
But the world community of scientists is pursuing it, and German and Japanese companies are handsomely funding this. And if there's anything to it, that will come out also. I don't think it's a matter of cruelty. I think that claims were made without sufficient evidence that were then disproved, and that left a bad taste. And some scientists went too far and said anything remotely like this is nonsense or fraud, and maybe that's going too far. But the idea that it's fusion, that neutrons or gamma rays are produced, that more energy comes out than you put in, that's very dubious.
But you will agree that there's something there that the credible scientists are looking at.
Yes, there is something, but the question is,
what is
it? And it's many people think it's in the realm of chemistry and not of nuclear physics.
Right. 1-800-989-8255. How much of our culture influences the direction science is going to take. Let's say we can go from cold fusion to something else where if a culture maybe it's an Eastern culture that believes in body transport or something, that channeling is possible. Wouldn't that culture say, hey, let's take that direction and use our scientific evidence or our scientific technique to prove or disprove it? Whereas in a Western culture, you'll go in a totally different direction.
Sure, and that's very healthy. But any claim of body transference, I'm not even sure what it is, but whatever you have in mind, any claim that it happens has to satisfy committed skeptics. It has to convince them. It has to be compelling evidence. So sure, which topics scientists pursue is a very complex process involving cultural attitudes and personal ambition and wanting to pick a topic that's soluble in a lifetime and many other issues. But if you're going to get anywhere with it, you have to provide the compelling evidence, which is at the heart of science.
Even in physics research going on here, you've mentioned in published interviews that using a court of law, you convince a court of law, much less you couldn't convince a court of law about UFOs, for example, much less a court of scientists. But let's say hypothetically, if I decided that I was going to compare two places of research, I'm willing to bet you that using your own idea of convincing a court of law, if I asked a jury to believe in some theories of superstring physics, for example, where they ask us to believe that something could exist in 24 dimensions that then collapse down to 4 dimensions or 10 dimensions, that a jury would have more trouble believing the validity of such a wacky idea than they would the testimony of thousands of people who have seen or supposedly have seen UFOs.
Maybe, but string theory is by no means accepted, and there are very distinguished skeptics like Steven Weinberg at the University of Texas in Austin. And I think the most you could say about string theory is that it's promising. But of course there are things that are technically too difficult for unselected juries, as there are in matters of tort law and so on.
Right.
There are cases where juries are chosen to be expert, or where a judge is chosen rather than a jury for precisely that reason. But that doesn't mean that that the issues are either clearer or less clear because they're complex.
Let's go to Pete in Seattle. Hi, Pete.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. Mr. Sagan, I'm a big fan of yours, and I think I'm actually just a few miles away from you, actually, here in town. What I wanted to say was I think that the lack of critical thinking skills is practically almost the root of all evil. Successful critical thinking goes way beyond, scientific topics. It goes into every part of our life: social behavior, economics, morality, ethics, and all that kind of thing. I'm wondering what we can do to try and do a little more organized teaching of critical thinking skills, maybe in the schools, to everyone, really. But I think it would go a long ways towards kind of, I hate to use the phrase raising the lowest common denominator, but I think that's kind of what it would be towards. All of us kind of getting together and choosing to evolve and develop our minds kind of as a goal seems to be put on hold right now.
Yes, well, part of the problem is you start teaching young people critical thinking, and then they'll start criticizing their political institutions and their religious institutions. And
that's all right.
Yeah, but then the people in power say, "Oh my God, what are we doing?"
Well, I'm thinking about trying to get the people in power as part of the students in this project, Because I think
I think people in power have a vested interest to oppose critical thinking.
Yeah, they sure
do. You see, if we don't improve our understanding of critical thinking and develop it as kind of second nature, then we're just suckers ready to be taken by the next charlatan who ambles along. And there are lots of charlatans. There are lots of ways of gaining power and money by deceiving people who are not skilled in critical thinking. Mm-hmm. So what you suggest is absolutely essential, But getting it done is very difficult since there are so many institutional impediments.
People, and I think people are used to, because this is the way that a lot of life works ever since you were a child, are used to dealing with black and white issues. There's either a wrong or a right. There's a winner, a loser. There's a ball game in between, and then there's a winner and a loser. And they're not used to accepting that there are gray areas and possibly many answers to a question.
Yeah.
That's right. There's an intolerance for ambiguity. Don't give me the alternatives. Just tell me what's right. But in many cases, because humans are imperfect, we don't know what's right, and it's essential to give the various views. And what's more, if we're forced to confront views opposing our own, then we can test our own views and see if they stand up, and if they don't, why would we want to hold on to them?
Thanks for calling, Pete.
Thank you.
Dr. Sagan, what happened to the scientist as a social and political activist? What happened? Linus Pauling is not around anymore. You see, maybe Paul Ehrlich is a little more active these days than he has been in the past. You yourself were out there and still are politically active, or at least socially active, speaking out when you think things should be spoken about. But you don't see the role models of scientists that people think and can use and could rally around, even if it's just purely on scientific issues.
Well, I think there are many such cases, but they don't get much publicity. For example, there's Ted Postel at MIT, a former civilian scientist with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who examined the Patriot, so-called missiles. Is that what they were called? In the Gulf War, the anti-ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
And showed that the evidence seems to show that not a single Iraqi Scud was shot down, despite the claim of the manufacturer that the success rate, the destruction rate of Iraqi Scuds was enormous. Now, this is a effort of a single scientist who happened to have some expertise in military hardware, who, out of conscience, decided that he was going to blow the whistle on these guys. And there's lots of whistleblowers. The tobacco industry is beginning to show people with scientists with some conscience. You see lots of it. But the issues that, say, Linus Pauling was connected with were critical issues of public health and life and death, and likewise Paul Ehrlich, which necessarily gathers more public interest than questions of whether Scud missiles were shot down or not in the Iraqi Gulf War.
1-800-989-8255. Let's go to Larry in Brooklyn. Hi, Larry.
Yes, hi, Doctor. I agree entirely. You sort of stole a little of my thunder. This whole rise in the belief of mystical phenomenon, and you see on TV now the, what is it called, the psychic hotlines? They're unbelievable. In Weimar, Germany, and now even in post-Soviet Russia, there's a tremendous rise in this. Do you see a tie-in between totalitarianism/fascism and an inability to think critically on social and political issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. After all, the dictators don't want people to be critically assessing what they say. They merely want their citizens to accept what they say and believe and do. And you have statements by Hitler, for example, that were very clear on this, in which he says that science is merely a convention, that truth is merely a convention, and that in his regime, people will adopt a different convention, the convention of will. Whatever the Führer wills is what people will consider true, and evidence has nothing to do with it. I think the trend today towards thinking that science is just another belief system, no more valid than any other belief system, has distinct totalitarian aroma about it.
It's scary. And just one brief question. about teaching youth science. It's a question about reification and animation. In other words, commonly when we talk to kids, they'll say two magnets attract each other, or the electron wants to do this or wants to do that, and we imbue it with, we put
anthropomorphize.
Right. Tongue twister. We imbue it with human attributes, or the question of what is a field, and we sprinkle iron filings when it's just a graphic representation. There is no electron per se. We can't sense it. We can't smell it. We only know it by how it acts upon other things, meters, devices, measuring devices. Yet it's a hypothetical construct. But yet, in common language, we say electron or magnetic field. And to get this idea of graphic representation as being just that, confusing the road with a map, to use a logician's terminology. How would you deal with this at the level of elementary and high school? It's hard. You know what I'm saying? Not to read.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about an electron repelling another electron, or
when you use the word wants to,
or the Earth attracting an asteroid, and so on. There are convenient ways to think, but if we suddenly think that the Earth has a mind and it's sexually enamored of the asteroid, and that's what it means about being attracted to, then of course that's something quite different.
Right, but you see what I mean? Even with professional scientists, the field becomes as if space. Well, in some cases it is, but in ordinary, elementary school and high school, they put the iron filings down, and you can see them, and that's the field.
Well, that's a tracer of the field. See, I think the Faraday Maxwell theory of fields has been tremendously productive.
Oh, it has,
and explains the world very well, and that's all we ask of it.
But we can go no further and say I've seen an electron. No one has seen an electron.
But you see the when you pick up a book, let's say, you have the sense that here's something solid and real, and I don't have to deduce anything. But in fact, you're not touching the book. The electric field of your fingers is interacting with the electric field of the book, and there is in fact no physical contact.
Right.
But that seems so contrary to common sense that we don't teach it. I think everything we know has this abstraction from reality. But all we ask of science is that it predictably explain the reality that we see, that it is ultimately true, maybe beyond what humans can do, if that phrase has any meaning at all.
Talking with Carl Sagan this hour on Talk of the Nation Science Friday on National Public Radio. And he's author of the new book, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. Some of the greatest paradigm shifts, that's a great phrase. It explains a lot, but nobody understands it if they don't know. Some of the greatest changes in our society have come about from popularizing events via mass media. 3 Mile Island may have been bad news for the nuclear industry, but the China Syndrome movie was really probably worse than the accident itself. Popular movies and culture have a way of changing people's views. E.T., extraterrestrials, have people talking about life in outer space. You've written lots of books about science. Do you believe that television and the Cosmos series being the most spectacular and popular series of its kind, do you still believe that the popular medium is the way, no matter how many issues of Scientific American are sold or whatever, that this is the way to influence people's views about science?
I think that television is a tremendously useful and powerful and underused medium for exciting people about science, for eliciting their sense of wonder, and for teaching some science facts, but mainly about getting people excited so they will go off and teach themselves or take courses or something of that sort. Cosmos, we never imagined would be as successful as it was. It's been seen by more than 500 million people in over 60 countries worldwide, and it's still being seen, and I still get letters, and I'm stopped on the street by people who say how it changed their lives, how they were, women especially, say they were taught that science wasn't for them, that they were too stupid for science, that Cosmos got them excited about science, and they went back and now they're a oceanographer or a microbiologist or whatever it is. There is a tendency to discourage people from science, especially in junior high and high school, who are well fitted for science. We have a kind of fear of science, and part of the reason is that science is able to show what constitutes a wrong answer. And unlike some other fields where no matter what you say might be right, here in science you can really make a mistake and have to defend your view before other people who can actually draw upon facts to disprove it. So it makes some people nervous, the people who want the world to conform to their wishes rather than to the universe's own internal reality.
You told me when we last met out in December in California, and Drea, your wife, you were telling me that you were working on a movie. Are you at liberty to talk about that at all?
I can talk about it a little bit.
A new movie based on Contact, your book?
Based on my novel Contact, about first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence via the receipt of a complex radio message. It's a Warner Brothers movie. It's starring Jodie Foster, and it's in production. Primary photography will begin sometime later this year, and it's unclear when it should be in the theaters, but late '97 at the earliest.
Can you teach science through this movie? Is there?
I'm certainly working hard to get across some of the wonder and some of the method of science, and I think we're gonna have some of that. The big screen is an amazing tool for teaching the wonders of astronomy, especially. I can't wait to see how some of the ideas that we're having are going to materialize on the big screen.
The Kubrick's film 2001, A Space Odyssey, I thought was a milestone in teaching science, but things that went on in there that were absolutely, about gravity and space travel and things like that.
Right. It's amazing how 2001 stands up today. It doesn't look the least bit dated, whereas 2010, its successor with a non-Stanley Kubrick director, looked obsolescent when it came out. And today is just terribly dated. So you can do these things well, and you can do them poorly, and we're hoping with Contact to do it well.
So you'd be happy to have the 2001 success that movie had. that level.
I'd be happy to come anywhere within shouting distance of 2001. That was an extraordinary movie.
And on the serious side, though, but this is a good way to teach, to reach the public and to teach science. And
movies and television can do amazing things in teaching at least some science, but mainly in making science accessible, in convincing people that they don't have to worry that they're too stupid to understand it, or that it's stuff that only nerds and geeks are interested in. I think everybody is interested in many of the issues of science, and just a question of getting it to them in an accessible way.
Carl, stay well. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ira. Pleasure talking to you.
Thanks again for coming on the program. Carl Sagan, of course, is a professor of astronomy and space sciences at Cornell University in Ithaca, and author of an extremely good book, The Demon-Haunted World, Science is a Candle in the Dark, published by Random House. Thanks for joining me again.